Hello, and welcome back to our hate crime awareness campaign. And today we're with the CAJ, a human rights organization that over the years has battled for the rights of ethnic minorities and worked to address hate crime from a policy perspective in Northern Ireland. And they're going to talk a little bit about marrying policy with action on the ground to effectively address hate crime. Here's what Daniel Holder had to say. Daniel, thanks for having us here today. If you just want to start out by telling us a bit about yourself and the CAJ.
Hi, well, I'm Daniel Holder. I'm from CAJ, the Committee on the Administration of Justice. We're a Belfast-based human rights organisation. We also co-convene, along with the trade union Unison, the Equality Coalition, which is over 100 NGOs and trade unions working collectively on equality issues, including the issues around hate crimes, racist expression, sectarianism, homophobia, etc.
Excellent. And what are some of the things that CAJ has undertaken to address hate crime?
Well, we've been involved inputting very heavily into the hate crimes review. We'd lobbied for quite a considerable time to get a reform of the legislation, and we'd also had a significant focus on the issue of tackling incitement to hatred, i.e. those forms of hate expression and hate speech that really tip over the boundary of what would be protected freedom of expression into stuff that really intimidates, incites on the basis of sort of racist and sectarian and homophobic discourse and causes significant harm to communities, and that's the level of that reaches that sort of threshold where the state, under its human rights duties, is duty bound to intervene to prevent that from happening.
And what do you think are some of the considerations and maybe some of the barriers to addressing hate crime from a legislative or policy point of view?
Well, not having any hate crimes laws, which is one particular issue. I mean, we know at the moment we don't actually have a hate crimes law as such. We have a provision on extended sentencing, which I think there's pretty much universal acceptance doesn't work, which is why we had the hate crimes review and the recommendations that came out of that. Sometimes as well, I think there's we need not just to focus on the issue of hate crimes, particularly in a sort of campaigning or public relations sense. There's much broader issues that need addressed. I mean, you need to address, for example, if you're going to have protections of the law working effectively, you need to address issues of institutional racism within policing and within the criminal justice system, the way sort of intimidation is dealt with, the way harassment is dealt with, the way even what we've called hate expression in public space is dealt with, where we still see an example of largely patterns and practice of either concealment or non-intervention for items that are used in public space for racist or sectarian intimidation. You even, I suppose, see a stage whereby sectarianism in some senses has almost become normalized, as if that, and you don't see intervention where there's, in particular, where there's suspected paramilitary involvement, which is exactly where there should be intervention. So we have a state where we have a state, a reality whereby housing intimidation is very commonplace. It's not that individuals are inherently sectarian or only want to live in particular areas. The major barrier is intimidation. You don't move to particular areas because you're not safe. Yet we have a tackling paramilitarism strategy that makes no reference to racism, makes no real reference to intimidation beyond some issues around organised crime, but certainly does not look at dismantling the territorial control of public space that reinforces housing segregation and indeed housing inequality. So there's many barriers and many issues that need tackled, and simply at the moment, all that needs to be done isn't being done.
Can you tell us a little bit about the Equality Coalition, what it's funded to achieve, and what it's done to address hate crime as well?
Well, one of the things why the Equality Coalition is there is because everyone is in there from the whole equality sector, whether it's the women's sector, the LGBT sector, ethnic minorities, disability, all of the groups that tend to face hate expression. So we've ran a couple of years ago a major conference around at which there was a call, and at which the former minister, Claire Sugden, again reiterated the push for a review of hate crimes legislation that ultimately happened. But that's when we really delved into the impacts on affected communities of incitement to hatred and of hate expression, and we looked at some of those issues in detail. We've also just produced a report which we're finalising and engaging with the main public authorities on, around tackling hate expression in public space, be that graffiti, be that flags, not all flags of course, but flags that are used specifically for the purposes of intimidating people from housing, etc. But it really is a forum for discussion and for collective action and for collective solidarity among all the groups. I mean, clearly this would delve into the online space as well, where particularly yes, there is sectarian, homophobic abuse, but also very vitriolic, misogynistic abuse, and increasingly so online, particularly directed against women involved in public life. So they're the type of issues we'd engage on within the context of the coalition. And I think it's having groups from across the sector and the trade union movement there creates a very powerful collective voice.
Daniel, obviously the policy and the legislative side of things is very important, but what actions do you think need to be taken on the grassroots to effectively address hate crime?
Well, I think a lot of the work around hate crime, we have to move really beyond sort of public relations work on hate crime, sort of just saying that hate crime's a bad thing. Everyone knows that. What we really need is more state intervention to prevent, and public authorities really discharging the duties that they have that flow from human rights law to protect minority groups and other groups that tend to face hate expression, hate intimidation, etc. And that it involves having the right legislation in place. It involves empowering the grassroots. It involves education programs. It involves a whole lot of other things. And a lot of this really isn't rocket science, because we sometimes sort of think we need to take an exceptionalist approach or a different approach here, but this is not a unique issue. Sectarianism, the UN, Council of Europe have recognised as a form of racism. And then there's a huge body of international instruments with recommendations and actions and models that can be used to tackle it, along with broader racism. Same goes for homophobia, same goes for misogyny, disableism. These are issues both across Europe in general, but in the world more broadly. So I think we do need to bring to bear a lot of that international learning to the local level.
And Daniel, just one last question. If you want to dive into the strands of hate crime a little bit and talk about how you're addressing maybe racial hate crime, sectarian hate crime, etc.
Okay, well, let's pick up racist hate crime. I mean, there's a lot of difference in approaches that need happening. I mean, you can still see examples whereby public authorities, police and others dealing with racist hate crime will still look for any explanation other than racism for why the hate crime has taken place, even when it's very obvious. There's still also, at a senior level at least, there can be significant denial about the involvement of elements of loyalist paramilitarism in racist hate crime, and that's a significant problem, because until you name something, you cannot tackle it. There's still a significant practice of disguising involvement of paramilitary involvement in, say, housing intimidation, where information either isn't gathered or certainly is not routinely produced that would identify patterns and then enable us to form strategies to deal with it. But it's also the whole model of policing, and particularly intelligence and covert policing. I think we're still stuck in a place where we're yet to shift to what we need, which is a law enforcement approach to covert and intelligence-led policing, rather than being stuck in essentially what is a conflict management model, where the activities of groups are managed, and including the unlawful activities are managed, but are not stopped, and that's all designed around keeping a lid on things and protecting the state. But what's lost in this is that the state's duty is to protect the human rights of absolutely everyone within its jurisdiction, and not to allow a certain level of tolerance of, for example, racist activities, in order to maintain a particular type of conflict management approach. I think all of that needs re-examined and looked at, because the impact on the ground on ethnic minorities is massive. It's frightening, the percentage figure for how likely you are, if you're a member of our ethnic minority communities, to be a victim of an attack or intimidation.